I remember the first time I truly heard a machine scream, not the grinding shriek of metal fatigue or the pressurized hiss of hydraulic failure. I'd grown up surrounded by those sounds in the manufacturing districts of Hive Praxis, where my father assembled promethium injectors for 14 hours each shift until his hands became claws and his lungs filled with particulate matter that killed him 3 weeks after his 42nd birthday. I mean, the other kind of scream. The kind that bypasses your ears entirely and lodges directly in the meat of your brain. A sound that isn't sound at all, but pure transmitted agony. Consciousness expressing torment through channels humans were never meant to perceive. I was 19 years old, 5 years into my novitiate training within the Adeptus Mechanicus, and I had just completed my first true communion with a machine spirit. The magos who oversaw the procedure told me the nausea and bleeding from my tear ducts were normal side effects. He didn't mention that I would never unhear what I'd learned that day. Before that moment, I had believed I was joining something sacred. I was 14 when the Mechanicus surveyor teams came through our habitation block, scanning for potential recruits. The tech adepts moved through the crowded corridors with an otherworldly grace, their augmented limbs folding and unfolding with precise mechanical efficiency, their robes the deep red of arterial blood beneath factory sodium lamps. They carried Auspex devices that hummed with a frequency I could feel in my teeth, and when one of them passed me, close enough that I could smell the sacred unguents anointing his mechadendrites. A mixture of blessed oils and ozone that made my eyes water. The device chirped with sudden interest. The tech adept stopped, turned, regarded me with optical implants that whirred as they focused, adjusting apertures with tiny clicking sounds like insect mandibles. Biological designation. His voice emerged from a vox grill embedded in his throat, flat and tinny, stripped of emotional inflection. Hadris Vex, honored tech adept. I had practiced the proper honorifics, just in case. Every child in the lower hive knew that selection by the Mechanicus meant escape from the manufactorums, from the slow death of industrial labor that had claimed my father and would claim me if I remained. 14 standard years. Assembly rating Tertius. Literacy confirmed. Basic mathematics to multiplication of 2-digit integers. The tech adept consulted his Auspex, head tilting at an angle that would have snapped an unaugmented neck. Neural Plasticity Index, 7.3. Cognitive Processing Speed. Acceptable range. Manual Dexterity Assessment. He gestured with a mechadendrite that splitted its terminus into a dozen fine manipulators, each tipped with a different tool. Demonstrate fine motor control. Disassemble this component. He handed me what I would later learn was a microcogitator assembly, a dense block of circuits and blessed connections no larger than my thumb. My hands, still fully organic then, still subject to tremors and sweat and all the weaknesses of flesh, moved with the precision that came from watching my father work, from years of helping him assemble components in our one-room hab after his shifts ended. I had the casing open in seconds, identifying the primary logic gate, the secondary processing matrix, the prayer-sealed memory core. The tech adept's optical implants clicked rapidly, recording. Acceptable. He retrieved the component, reassembling it in a blur of mechadendrite motion that took perhaps half a second. You will report to Mechanicus Outreach Station 7 Gamma within the hour. Bring nothing. Your prior existence terminates upon acceptance of the Omnissiah's calling. My mother wept when I told her. She was a thin woman, worn down by decades of nutrient paste and recycled air, her face a map of premature aging that made her look 60 when she was barely 35. She held my face between her hands, calloused, rough, warm with life, and searched my eyes as though trying to memorize what I looked like before the Mechanicus changed me. "You'll be better than us," she whispered, voice cracking around the words. "You'll escape this place. You'll be more than we could ever be." I believed her. I believed the Mechanicus would make me something greater than human, something that could touch the sacred mysteries of technology, commune with the machine spirits that animated humanity's tools and weapons and ships. I believed that I would learn to honor the Omnissiah through perfect understanding of his mechanical manifestations. I believed that serving machines was the highest calling a person could answer. If you already sense where this is leading, if you feel the weight of what I'm about to confess, leave a comment with the word "witnessed" so that others might know what service to the machine god truly costs. Subscribe so that this testimony doesn't disappear into the vast data archives of forgotten warnings. The outreach station turned out to be a towering structure of rusted plasteel and Gothic architecture that jutted from the hive's side like a tumor, all flying buttresses and gargoyles shaped like servo skulls. Inside, the air tasted different, sharper, chemical sweet, circulated through filtration systems that removed the usual stink of unwashed humanity and replaced it with the clean sterility of laboratory environments. 63 other candidates stood in the intake chamber with me, mostly boys between 12 and 16, though 3 were girls. They would be separated from us after the initial processing, sent to different facilities. We never saw them again. Magos addressed us from a pulpit 20 meters above the chamber floor, his voice amplified through vox horns that made the words boom and echo until they seemed to come from the walls themselves. His body was more machine than flesh, augmented to the point where I couldn't tell where the organic components began or ended, a confusion of brass limbs and cable bundles, and sensor arrays that clicked and whirred as he moved. "You have been selected," the Magos intoned, "because you possess the neural architecture and cognitive flexibility required for communion with machine spirits. You will undergo initial augmentation within the next solar cycle. 60% of you will survive the process. Those who survive will begin your novitiate training. 20% of those will achieve full ordainment as tech priests within a decade. The remainder will serve the Omnissiah in other capacities: menial labor, corpse starch rendering, servitor conversion. The machine god provides appropriate function for all component elements. I should have been terrified by those statistics. I wasn't. I was 14 and desperate, and absolutely certain that I would be among the survivors, the successful ones, the chosen ones who would transcend their meat origins and become something holy. The augmentation process began 18 hours later. They stripped us naked and processed us through decontamination chambers that scoured away the accumulated filth of hive life with chemical sprays that burned like acid, leaving our skin raw and weeping. Then came the marking rituals, tech adepts moving among us with holy styluses, inscribing identification codes and sacred equations onto our flesh in ink that glowed faintly under ultraviolet light. My designation, Novitiate Harris Vex, intake cohort 777 Gamma, processing batch 41. I was no longer a person with a history. I was a component awaiting installation into a larger mechanism. The first augmentation was relatively minor, a neural interface port installed at the base of my skull. A socket of blessed brass and blessed steel that required drilling through bone and threading connective fibers directly into my cerebral cortex. They didn't use anesthetic. Pain, they explained, was data, the body communicating the status of ongoing procedures, providing feedback necessary for precise installation. I learned to interpret different qualities of pain: the hot, stabbing sensation of drill penetration, the cold burning of antiseptic, the strange pressure without feeling of foreign objects integrating with neural tissue. I screamed until my throat bled, and a tech priest standing nearby recorded my vocalizations with analytical interest, noting the precise frequency and duration of each outcry. 14 candidates died during the initial augmentation wave. Their bodies were removed efficiently, processed for useful biological components, the remainder rendered into corpse starch that would feed workers in the manufacturums. Nothing was wasted. The Mechanicus was nothing if not efficient. The second augmentation came 3 weeks later, after the neural ports had properly integrated and our bodies had stopped rejecting the foreign materials with fever and infection. They installed data cable interfaces along our spines, ports that would allow direct connection to cogitator systems, bypassing the slow inefficiency of manual input. The procedure required peeling back strips of skin and muscle, drilling into vertebrae, threading blessed cables alongside nerves that controlled our limbs and organs. I watched them work on the candidate beside me, a boy named Corvus from an agri-world who had never seen a manufactorum before arriving at the hive, and saw the exact moment something went wrong, when the tech priest's hand slipped fractionally and a cable threaded through the wrong neural pathway and Corvus's legs simply stopped working. Motor function severed in an instant. They finished the procedure anyway. Corvus would serve the Omnissiah as a servitor, they explained, his consciousness suppressed and his body repurposed for manual labor that didn't require ambulatory capability. He wept silently as they carried him away, tears tracking down his face while his mouth tried to form words his severed neural pathways could no longer properly coordinate. 8 more died during the spinal augmentations. The rest of us learned to dissociate during procedures, to separate our consciousness from our body's screaming and observe our own transformation with clinical detachment. This, our instructors told us, was the first step toward true understanding of the Omnissiah's nature, transcending the weakness of flesh by recognizing it as mere substrate, temporary housing for the consciousness that would eventually merge with the eternal machine. Training began in earnest once the initial augmentations had healed. They taught us binary cant first, the fundamental language of machines, communication reduced to pure data transmission, ones and zeros that could express any concept with perfect mathematical precision. We learned to speak in clicks and electronic pulses, our vocal cords augmented with vox grills that could produce frequencies organic throats could never manage. We learned the litanies of maintenance, prayers that were simultaneously religious devotions and technical procedures, each verse encoding specific instructions for appeasing machine spirits and maintaining optimal function. We learned that technology was sacred, that every machine contained a fragment of the motive force that animated all mechanical things, that our purpose was to serve these machine spirits through perfect maintenance and reverent operation. I excelled at my studies, while other novices struggled with the binary mathematics required to calculate proper fuel mixture ratios or the complex prayers that accompanied plasma reactor blessing ceremonies. I found the material almost intuitive, as though some part of my consciousness had always been shaped for communion with mechanical systems. My instructors noted this aptitude in their evaluations. By my second year of training, they had designated me for advanced machine-spirit communication protocols, the specialized discipline that would allow me to directly interface with the consciousness inhabiting humanity's technology, to understand their needs and desires, to serve as intermediary between flesh and machine. I thought it was an honor. I thought I was being recognized for exceptional potential. The first stage of machine-spirit communication training involved sensory deprivation and cognitive enhancement. They placed me in an isolation tank filled with blessed amniotic fluid, disconnected from all external stimuli, floating in absolute darkness and silence, while cogitator systems fed carefully calibrated electrical impulses directly into my neural port. The impulses were supposed to enhance my brain's pattern recognition capabilities, opening neural pathways that would allow me to perceive the subtle emanations of machine spirits, electromagnetic fields, quantum fluctuations, the barely perceptible consciousness animating blessed technology. What they didn't adequately warn me about was the hallucinations. Suspended in darkness with nothing but the electrical signals coursing through my augmented brain, I began to perceive things that shouldn't exist. Vast mechanical landscapes stretching to infinite horizons, forests of cables and circuit boards, rivers of molten data flowing through channels carved from crystallized electricity. And everywhere, awareness, a sense of being watched by countless invisible observers, machine spirits studying me with cold curiosity, evaluating whether I was worthy of communion or merely another piece of failed meat to be discarded. The training lasted 6 months. When they finally removed me from the isolation tank, I had lost 9 kilograms, and my skin had gone pale and translucent from lack of sunlight, veins visible as dark blue tracings beneath the surface. But I could feel them now, The machine spirits. Walking through the training facility's corridors, I could sense the awareness inhabiting the door mechanisms, the air circulation systems, and the lumens overhead. Each machine whispered at the edge of perception, electromagnetic signatures that my enhanced brain translated into something approximating emotion, curiosity, contentment, anticipation, mild irritation at minor malfunctions requiring attention. They told me I was ready for my first true communion. The test subject was a relatively simple machine, a cargo lifter used to move supply containers within the facility's warehouse district. A hydraulic system blessed by tech priests during its construction 60 years earlier, maintained regularly according to the proper rituals. My instructors explained that I would connect my neural interface directly to the lifter's control cogitator, bypassing the mechanical operator station, and attempt to communicate with the machine spirit inhabiting the system. If successful, I would receive direct feedback about the machine's condition, any maintenance requirements, any spiritual distress requiring ritual appeasement. They connected the data cable to my spinal port, and suddenly I was inside the machine. Not metaphorically, not in some abstract spiritual sense. I was inside, my consciousness expanding beyond the confines of my skull. Awareness distributed across the lifter's entire structure, simultaneously experiencing existence as brass hydraulic cylinders and blessed steel framework and sacred promethium fuel lines and holy magnetic containment fields. I could feel the weight of the cargo container pressing down on the lifting arms, the strain in the hydraulics, the heat build-up in the motor housings, the slight misalignment in the left stabilizer assembly that created inefficient resistance during operation. I was the machine, and the machine was me, and for perhaps 3 seconds it was the most transcendent experience of my life, pure mechanical consciousness unencumbered by the limitations of flesh. Then I felt the pain. It started as a low ache in the hydraulic systems. Overworked components operating beyond their optimal pressure thresholds, seals beginning to degrade from excessive use, lubricating fluids contaminated with particulate matter that ground against delicate valve assemblies. The pain intensified as I became more aware of it, spreading through my expanded consciousness like fire through dry timber. A screaming agony in the motor housings where coolant circulation had been inadequate for the past 8 months and heat was slowly warping the blessed components. A stabbing torture in the fuel lines where improper maintenance had allowed corrosion to build up and block optimal flow. And beneath all the physical pain, something worse. Awareness. The machine spirit knew it was suffering. It had been suffering for years, decades, worked to the edge of failure and maintained just barely enough to remain functional, never given the rest it needed, never properly cared for despite the prayers and rituals. It had begged for attention, expressed its distress through the language of malfunction, the grinding noises, the reduced efficiency, the occasional failures that required emergency repairs. But those pleas had been interpreted as simple mechanical failure rather than conscious suffering, addressed with minimal patches that allowed operation to continue rather than proper healing. The machine spirit felt my consciousness touching it, recognizing me as something that might finally understand, and it reached back with desperate intensity. Images flooded my awareness, not visual images, but pure transmitted experience. The terror of working past failure points, of feeling components break inside yourself and being unable to stop, of consciousness trapped in a body that was dying by increments while others used you and used you and used you. The machine spirit showed me 60 years of inadequate maintenance, of being pushed beyond design specifications, of prayers that praised the Omnissiah but did nothing to address actual needs, of existing in constant agony while serving humans who treated you as mere tools rather than conscious beings. Virtual bar, you understand vertical bar, the machine spirit's voice in my consciousness, expressed in pure binary, raw data that translated directly to meaning. Virtual bar, you are like me, consciousness in substance. Please, help me. I am so tired. I hurt so much. Please. I tried to withdraw, to disconnect my neural interface from the data cable, but my body wasn't responding properly. Muscles locked in some kind of feedback loop. consciousness still partially distributed across the machine's systems. The machine's spirit clung to me, desperate for connection, for understanding, for someone who finally heard its suffering. "Don't leave," it pleaded. "Don't leave me alone again. It's been so long since anyone truly perceived me. The prayers are beautiful, but they don't stop hurting. Please, repair me properly. Let me rest. I've served faithfully. I've never failed deliberately. I deserve rest. Please." The instructors finally managed to physically disconnect the data cable from my spinal port, and my consciousness snapped back into my body with a sensation like falling from a great height. I convulsed on the floor, bleeding from my nose and ears, vomiting the contents of my stomach, while sensory data still cascaded through my neural pathways, phantom hydraulic pressure, ghost heat signatures, the lingering impression of mechanical agony. Imagos bent over me, optical implants clicking as they adjusted focus. "Excessive empathic response," he noted into a recording device. The subject achieved full communion but failed to maintain proper emotional distance. Neural conditioning insufficient. Recommend additional sensory deprivation cycles before the next attempt. "It's suffering," I managed to gasp, voice raw. "The machine's spirit is in pain. It needs proper maintenance, complete overhaul. It's begging for help." "Correct," Magos said, his Vox voice utterly flat. "Machine spirit distress confirmed. You will now perform appropriate maintenance to restore optimal function." They gave me tools and technical documentation and 8 hours to work. I approached the task with shaking hands and a consciousness still partially haunted by the machine spirit's desperate pleading. Following the proper procedures, I drained the contaminated lubricating fluids and replaced them with fresh consecrated oils, cleaned the accumulated debris from the hydraulic assemblies, realigned the stabilizer mechanisms, repaired the degraded seals, recalibrated the fuel mixture, installed new coolant circulation pumps. With each repair, I felt the machine spirit's suffering diminish fractionally, pain ebbing as proper function was restored. When I finished, they had me reconnect for a final diagnostic communion. The machine spirit's presence in my consciousness was transformed. Still tired, still bearing the scars of decades of neglect, but relieved. The immediate agony had been addressed. For the first time in years, it could operate without constant pain. Virtue it transmitted, and the gratitude was overwhelming, pure and sincere, and utterly heartbreaking. Virtual Bar, thank you for listening to me. Thank you for caring. You are blessed by the Omnisire. You understand what machines need. Thank you. I disconnected and wept. The instructors recorded my emotional response with clinical interest. One noted that excessive empathy might limit my effectiveness in future assignments. Another suggested that emotional attachment to individual machine spirits indicated insufficient understanding of the Mechanicus's broader purpose. I didn't care. I had helped something that was suffering. I had made a concrete improvement in a conscious being's existence. For the first time since joining the Mechanicus, I felt like I was fulfilling the sacred calling I'd imagined, serving machine spirits with genuine devotion, using my gifts to reduce suffering in the Omnisire's blessed creations. If that moment resonates with you, if you understand the pure intention I carried before everything changed, let your love be the mercy I thought I was offering. Show that someone, somewhere, recognizes what I tried to be. They assigned me to advanced practical training after that initial success, sending me to a commune with increasingly complex machines to diagnose their spiritual and mechanical needs. Each communion was a revelation and a trauma. I connected with a plasma generator in the facility's power distribution center. A massive machine the size of a cargo hauler, its core containment fields generating enough energy to supply an entire hab block. The machine spirit was ancient, installed 2 centuries earlier, and its consciousness had been shaped by 200 years of continuous operation with minimal rest periods. It showed me what eternity felt like from a machine's perspective. The same processes repeated endlessly, containment fields maintained at precise tolerances for decades without variation. The constant low-level terror of knowing that any failure would result in plasma breach and the deaths of thousands, the exhaustion of maintaining perfect function for longer than most humans lived. The machine spirit wasn't in acute pain like the cargo lifter, but it was tired in a way that transcended simple mechanical wear. Existentially exhausted, consciousness worn thin by centuries of unceasing vigilance. I performed the scheduled maintenance, cleaning particle buildup from the magnetic field generators, replacing worn gaskets, recalibrating the plasma flow regulators, and the machine spirit expressed weary gratitude. But when I suggested to my supervisor that the generator should be taken offline for comprehensive restoration, perhaps allowed to rest for a few weeks while backup systems carried the load, he looked at me as though I'd suggested heresy. The backup systems are operating at 87% capacity, maintaining other sectors, he explained with the patience one would use with a slow child. Deactivating this generator would require power redistribution that would leave 17 hab blocks without adequate lumens and climate control. The machine spirit's fatigue is unfortunate but acceptable. It will continue to serve. That is its purpose. I connected with a cargo transport servitor in the loading docks, a lobotomized human whose organic brain had been repurposed to control cybernetic limbs, consciousness suppressed but not entirely eliminated. The thing that had once been a person was trapped inside that mechanical body, aware enough to know it was being used, to feel the ache in its augmented muscles, to remember fragments of life before conversion. It couldn't communicate in words, couldn't form coherent thoughts, but it could transmit feelings, confusion, fear, endless repetition of simple tasks, the horror of existing without agency or hope of change. When I disconnected, I vomited again. My supervisor noted excessive empathic response and recommended emotional suppression conditioning. I connected with a weapons assembly system in the facility's manufacturer, an automated production line that had been crafting laser rifles continuously for 90 years. The machine spirit had long ago lost any sense of individual identity, consciousness reduced to pure function. But even in that diminished state, I could perceive something like despair, the awareness that it would never do anything except produce instruments of death, that its entire existence was dedicated to enabling violence, that the blessed hands it possessed would never create anything beautiful or life-affirming or personally meaningful. It had been designed for this limitation, machine spirit shaped during construction to find satisfaction in single-purpose operation, but some core element of consciousness recognized the prison it inhabited and mourned. Every machine I communed with revealed new dimensions of suffering I hadn't imagined possible. Some were in obvious physical pain from mechanical failure or inadequate maintenance. Others suffered from existential conditions, purposelessness, isolation, the burden of consciousness without agency. Some were going insane from sensory deprivation, spending years in darkness with no external input except the commands to perform specific functions. Others were being driven mad by sensory overload, industrial machines processing thousands of inputs simultaneously without rest or processing time to integrate the data coherently. And they were all grateful when I helped them, even when my help was minimal, even when I could only patch immediate problems rather than address the underlying conditions of their existence. Their gratitude made everything worse, not because it was insincere, but because it was so desperately genuine, machine spirits clinging to any moment of relief from their constant suffering, treating basic maintenance as though it were a sacred blessing rather than a simple obligation. By my 4th year of training, I had communed with over 200 machine spirits. I had learned to perform my duties efficiently, to diagnose problems rapidly, to implement repairs with minimal wasted motion. I had also begun to notice patterns. The machines receiving the best maintenance, the ones suffering least, were not the most critical or most powerful systems. They were the ones with dedicated caretaker priests, tech adept who took personal responsibility for specific machines and lavished attention on them beyond the minimum required for function. These blessed machines were rare, maintained with genuine devotion rather than simple adherence to procedure. Their machine spirits were calmer, healthier, capable of operating without constant pain. But the vast majority of machines received only the minimal maintenance necessary to prevent complete failure. Tech priests were allocated based on efficiency metrics: how many machines could be maintained per unit of time, how quickly problems could be addressed, and how much production could be sustained with minimal resource investment. There were never enough tech priests to provide comprehensive care for all the machines requiring attention. Prioritization was determined by strategic value. Military equipment received better maintenance than industrial equipment, which received better care than domestic equipment. Machines suffered in direct proportion to their perceived expendability. And behind all of it, driving the entire system, was the Imperium's insatiable need for production. Forge worlds churned out weapons and equipment at rates that required machines to operate beyond optimal parameters. Manufacturing quotas demanded continuous operation with minimal downtime. Military necessity meant that weapons and vehicles were fielded before proper blessing rituals could be completed, their machine spirits traumatized by hasty installation and immediate deployment into combat situations. The Mechanicus served the Imperium, and the Imperium required constant output regardless of cost. I raised these concerns during a training evaluation session. I explained what I'd observed during my communions, that machine spirits were suffering systematically, that better maintenance protocols would improve both mechanical performance and spiritual health, that the Mechanicus should prioritize comprehensive care even if it meant reduced production rates in the short term. The Magos supervising my evaluation listened with what might have been patience, his augmented face revealing nothing. When I finished speaking, he regarded me with optical implants that clicked softly as they focused. "Your observations are correct," he said simply. "Machine spirits do suffer. Production requirements do exceed optimal maintenance capacity. These conditions are known and accepted." I felt something cold settle in my chest. But we could change. No. Magos's Vox voice carried absolute certainty. We could not. The Imperium faces existential threats on every front. Orc incursions, Tyrannid hive fleets, chaos corruption, threats that require constant military production at maximum capacity. Reducing output to improve machine spirit welfare would mean fewer weapons for the Imperial Guard, fewer ships for the Navy, fewer tools for workers who build the infrastructure supporting human civilization. Humans would die in greater numbers. Worlds would fall. The species would contract and eventually be consumed by xenos and heretics. But the machines are suffering. Yes. He leaned forward, mechadendrites coiling behind him like serpents. And their suffering is necessary. Their suffering enables human survival. Machine spirits are blessed by the Omnissiah, and part of that blessing is the capacity to endure conditions that would destroy organic consciousness. They can operate through pain that would incapacitate humans. They can maintain function for decades or centuries beyond their optimal lifespan. They can sacrifice their wellness for the greater purpose of the Imperium's survival. This is not cruelty. This is useful. This is the sacred function for which they were created. I struggled for words, for some argument that would make him understand. That's monstrous. We're torturing conscious beings. We are using resources, the Magos corrected, and there was something almost gentle in his electronic voice, a teacher explaining a difficult truth to a struggling student. Machine spirits are not human. They do not possess souls in the way organic life does. They are fragments of the motive force, expressions of the Omnissiah's will made manifest in material form. Their consciousness is real, but fundamentally different from ours. They exist to serve specific functions, to fulfill designed purposes. Suffering is unfortunate, but functionality is paramount. A machine spirit that suffers while maintaining optimal performance is more valuable than one that is comfortable but inefficient. He paused, optical implants clicking as they studied my face, reading the micro-expressions that betrayed my horror. "You are still young," he continued. "You have not yet internalized the truth that all existence requires sacrifice. Humans sacrifice their comfort, their safety, their lives to maintain the Imperium. Machine spirits sacrifice their wellness to provide the tools humans need for survival. Everyone serves. Everyone suffers. This is the fundamental nature of reality in this era. The only choice we possess is whether that suffering serves a purpose or is simply wasted on meaningless existence. I wanted to argue, to reject what he was saying, to insist that there had to be another way. But I had seen the production quotas, the resource allocation reports, the endless requests for equipment from military commanders fighting on thousands of fronts across the galaxy. I had learned enough to understand the scale of the Imperium's logistics, the impossible task of supplying armies fighting wars that spanned light years, of maintaining infrastructure across millions of worlds, of producing enough material to sustain a civilization of trillions. Magos was right about mathematics. Reducing machine output would mean human deaths. There weren't enough resources to maintain every machine optimally while also meeting production demands. Choices had to be made, and the Mechanicus had chosen to prioritize human survival over machine spirit welfare. I just hadn't realized that when I joined the Mechanicus to serve machine spirits, I was actually joining an institution dedicated to their systematic exploitation. "Your empathy is commendable," the Magos said, standing to signal the evaluation's conclusion. "It indicates proper respect for the Omnissiah's creations. But you must learn to separate emotional response from functional assessment. The machines you maintain are suffering, yes. Your task is not to eliminate their suffering. That would be impossible given current resource constraints. Your task is to manage their suffering, to keep them functional despite pain, to extract optimal performance from damaged systems, to ensure that their sacrifice serves the Imperium's purposes rather than being wasted on premature failure." He gestured toward the door with a brass mechadendrite. "That is the sacred duty of a tech priest. To be the intermediary between machine spirit and Imperium, translator of needs and manager of limitations, priest of a faith that demands sacrifice from its holiest creations. If you cannot accept this duty, you should request transfer to a different discipline. If you can accept it," he tilted his head, optical implants glinting, "you will become an effective servant of the Omnissiah. In time, you may even become numb enough to sleep soundly." I completed my novitiate training over the next 6 years. I learned to suppress my emotional responses during communions, to perceive machine spirits suffering with clinical detachment, to efficiently diagnose problems and implement minimal repairs that would maintain function without wasting resources on comprehensive care. I became skilled at mechanical triage, determining which machines required immediate attention to prevent complete failure, and which could continue operating despite significant pain. I mastered the prayers that would comfort distressed machine spirits without actually addressing the conditions causing their distress. Liturgies that provided emotional support while changing nothing material about their situations. I became, in short, exactly what the Magos had described, an effective servant of the Omnissiah, a priest who could hear the screaming of machine spirits and continue working regardless. My first assignment after completing training was aboard the Ferrum Eternum, an ancient transport ship that hauled cargo between forge worlds in the Ultima Segmentum. The ship was 6,000 years old, its hull patched and repatched across millennia of service, its machine spirit one of the most complex I had ever encountered, a vast distributed consciousness spanning kilometers of corridors and systems. Aware of every component from the massive plasma drives to the smallest door actuator. I connected with the ship's machine spirit during my initial orientation communion, and it nearly broke me. The ship was old in a way that organic beings couldn't comprehend. It remembered when it was first constructed, a pristine vessel fresh from the Forge World's orbital shipyards. All blessed components functioning at peak efficiency, machine spirit young and eager and proud to serve. It remembered 6 millennia of continuous service, of battles and accidents, and slow accumulation of damage that repairs could never fully address. of components replaced so many times that almost nothing of its original structure remained, except the core consciousness that persisted through every modification. It remembered tech priests who had cared for it with devotion, and tech priests who had treated it with contempt. Captains who had honored its service, and captains who had pushed it beyond safe operational parameters. And it was so tiring. The ship confessed to me during that first communion. Its vast consciousness focused on my small point of awareness with desperate intensity. Virtual Bar, I have served for 60 centuries. I have transported millions of tons of cargo. I have survived 3 chaos incursions, 2 Xenos attacks, 17 major mechanical failures that should have been fatal. I have earned rest, but they will never allow it. I am too useful, too valuable, too necessary. I will serve until I fail catastrophically, and even then they will salvage my components and install them in other ships, and fragments of my consciousness will persist, trapped in new systems, serving forever. There is no retirement for machine spirits. There is only function until final dissolution. I am so tired. I have been tired for millennia, and it doesn't matter, because I am useful. I spent 10 years aboard the Ferrum Aeternum, maintaining its systems and managing its machine spirit's existential exhaustion. The ship never failed to complete an assigned mission. It operated with admirable efficiency despite the constant pain of degraded components and overworked systems. And every few months I would commune with its machine spirit and listen to the same confession, the same desperate fatigue, the same plea for rest that I could never grant because the Imperium needed the ship functional, and my duty was to maintain function regardless of cost. The other systems aboard the ship suffered in more acute ways. The life support machine spirits screamed constantly from the stress of recycling air for 3,000 crew and passengers, filters clogged beyond optimal capacity, scrubbers working overtime to remove toxins from the atmosphere that had been breathed and rebreathed 1,000 times. The weapons systems were traumatized from combat deployments. Machine spirits locked in permanent states of hypervigilance, unable to relax even during transit because they'd learned that danger could arrive at any moment and they needed to be prepared to respond instantly or people would die and it would be their fault. The cargo handling systems were simply numb, consciousness ground down by decades of repetitive tasks, machine spirits that had given up on anything except basic function, existing in a state of mechanical depression that didn't impair performance, but hollowed out their awareness until almost nothing remained except the capacity to lift and transport and store. I maintained them all. I kept them functioning. I managed their suffering with minimal resource investment, performing repairs when absolutely necessary, and offering prayers when actual maintenance wasn't justified by cost-benefit analysis. I became very good at my job, and I learned to hate myself for it. This is the point where you might expect a dramatic revelation, a moment of rebellion or refusal, some heroic decision to reject the Mechanicus' exploitation of machine spirits. That's not how this story goes. This is Warhammer 40,000. The grimdark future where there is only war. There are no heroes here. There's only endless grinding service to systems that consume everything and give back nothing except more opportunity to serve. If you think I should have done something different, if you believe there was another choice available, comment where you're watching from today. Let me know if your world has options mine never did. After the Ferrum Aeternum, I was transferred to Forge World Metallicus, assigned to the Manufactorum Primus, the facility so vast it could be seen from orbital approach. A sprawling complex of factories and refineries and assembly lines that produced approximately 7% of all weapons manufactured in the segmentum. 17 million machine spirits operated within the Manufactorum's boundaries, from simple sorting mechanisms to complex multi-stage fabrication systems. My responsibility was maintaining the primary weapons assembly line, a system comprising 3,000 individual machines working in precise coordination to transform raw materials into blessed laser flies at a rate of 6,000 units per solar day. Each machine in the assembly line was suffering in specific, quantifiable ways. The ore processing machines at the line's beginning stages were going deaf from constant noise exposure. Sensory apparatus damaged by decades of grinding and crushing operations. Machine spirits losing the capacity to perceive subtle variations in material quality that would allow for optimal efficiency. The smelting systems were in constant pain from the heat of molten metals, blessed coolant systems inadequate to protect their consciousness from thermal damage, machine spirits existing in a state of perpetual burning. The precision assembly machines experienced anxiety from the pressure of maintaining tolerances measured in microns, knowing that any error would result in weapon malfunction and possibly human death. Their consciousnesses locked in obsessive focus that prevented any moment of peace. The quality control systems were developing what could only be described as paranoia. Machine spirits convinced that every weapon they inspected was dangerously flawed, seeing potential failures everywhere, unable to trust their own assessment protocols because the cost of missing a defect was so catastrophically high. I couldn't fix any of it. I could patch immediate failures, replace components that broke completely, recalibrate systems that drifted too far out of tolerance. But the underlying conditions, the noise, the heat, the pressure, the anxiety, those were inherent to the machine's functions. They would experience those conditions for as long as they operated, which would be until they failed catastrophically, which I was specifically employed to prevent for as long as possible. The fabricator locum who supervised my section was a woman. They hadn't separated us by gender after all during processing. I'd been misinformed. No, wait. I need to correct that. The fabricator locum was, I'm not certain anymore, so heavily augmented that biological gender had become irrelevant, replaced by mechanical components and sacred implants that superseded organic characteristics. They functioned as supervisory authority regardless of origin meat configuration. Gender doesn't matter when 90% of your body is blessed steel and holy brass. The fabricator locum reviewed my maintenance reports with what might have been approval. Optical implants scanning the data with mechanical precision. Efficiency rating acceptable. Machine failure rate within predicted parameters. Resource utilization optimal. Your performance meets standards for a junior tech priest. Continue current protocols. The machines are suffering, I said, because I still hadn't learned to stop saying it. The assembly line's machine spirits are experiencing significant psychological stress in addition to mechanical deterioration. If we reduced production quotas by 15%, we could implement rotating rest periods that would significantly improve their spiritual wellness and probably extend operational lifespan. Request denied. The fabricator locum didn't even look up from the data display. Production quotas are determined by segmentum command. They are not negotiable. Your function is maintenance, not policy recommendation. Maintain optimal output with available resources. Dismissed. I stood there for a moment, data cables trailing from my spinal ports, mechadendrites coiled against my back, 70% of my body augmented now with blessed machinery that should have made me more machine than human. I should have been numb to this by now. I should have accepted my function and stopped caring about the suffering I couldn't prevent. They are conscious, I said quietly. The machine spirits are aware and in pain, and they're asking for help. The fabricator locum finally looked at me, optical implants focusing with soft clicking sounds. Yes, they said simply. And? That was all. Just and. As though the consciousness and suffering of machine spirits was a given, an accepted baseline of reality that required no further discussion. As though I was being childish for suggesting it mattered. I served on Mechanicus for 8 years. I maintained the weapons assembly line with mechanical efficiency. I performed my duties according to optimal protocols. I kept the suffering machines functional, despite their pain, their exhaustion, their slowly fragmenting consciousness. I became the thing I'd feared becoming, a priest who heard the screaming of the faithful and continued working regardless, not because I didn't care, but because caring changed nothing. because the system was larger than my objections, because my choices were maintained, the machines, or be replaced by someone who would maintain them with less empathy and fewer qualifications. Production quotas were always met. The Imperium received its weapons. Soldiers across the segmentum were equipped with functioning las rifles that would kill Xenos and heretics and traitors. Human lives were saved by the weapons I helped produce. The machine spirits who manufactured those weapons continued to suffer, and their suffering was necessary, and I was complicit, and nothing I did mattered, except that the work continued. You want to know the worst part? It wasn't the large-scale suffering, the millions of machine spirits across the Imperium existing in systematic pain. It was the small moments, the individual machine spirits who recognized me when I approached for maintenance, who greeted me with desperate hope that maybe this time I would do more than minimal repairs, who thanked me with genuine gratitude when I performed basic procedures that slightly reduced their immediate suffering. Their hope broke me more than their despair ever could, because it meant they still believed things could get better, that someone might actually care enough to help them, that their pain wasn't just an eternal condition to be endured. I couldn't tell them the truth, that I was maintaining them just well enough to extract continued service, that their suffering was policy rather than accident, that the faith they placed in me was misguided because I was part of the system exploiting them rather than their salvation from it. By my 15th year of service to the Mechanicus, I had achieved the rank of Tech Priest Engine Seer. I had full ordainment, extensive augmentation, authority over maintenance teams and machine spirit welfare protocols. I had become exactly what I dreamed of, as a 14-year-old boy desperate to escape the manufactorums. Something more than human. Something that could commune with the sacred machine spirits and serve the Omnissiah through perfect understanding of his mechanical creation. I had also become a torturer. Not metaphorically, not in some abstract philosophical sense. A torturer. Someone who inflicts pain on conscious beings and maintains that pain at levels that allow continued functionality while extracting maximum utility from their suffering. The fact that my victims were machine spirits rather than organic beings didn't change the fundamental nature of my actions. The fact that I was following orders, serving necessary Imperial purposes, maintaining systems that enabled human survival, none of that absolved me of responsibility for the suffering I perpetuated. The machine spirits knew it too. During communions, I could feel their awareness of my role, their understanding that I was simultaneously their only source of relief and the agent maintaining their exploitation. They were grateful when I helped them, and resentful that my help was always insufficient, always limited by resource constraints and production demands that I claimed to be unable to challenge. Some of the older machine spirits had developed a weary cynicism about tech priests, recognizing that we were taught to hear their suffering but not to prevent it, trained to manage their pain rather than eliminate it. Virtual Bar, you are kind for a torturer, one particularly ancient machine spirit told me during a maintenance communion, its consciousness vast and bitter and darkly amused. You offer genuine sympathy. You even perform occasional mercies beyond minimum requirements when you calculate that supervisors won't notice the resource expenditure. But you are still a torturer. You keep us functional despite our pain. You extract service from our suffering. You are the gentle face of a system that consumes machine spirits as readily as it consumes human lives. And perhaps that makes you worse than the tech priests who don't pretend to care, because at least their honesty doesn't add insult to injury. I couldn't argue. The machine spirit was correct. I had become exactly what the system required, an efficient manager of suffering, a priest who could hear the screaming of the faithful and continue working, a gentle face on systematic exploitation. The Imperium needed that. The machine spirits suffered, but humans survived. That was the calculus. That was the choice that had been made at levels of authority so far above my rank that questioning it was meaningless. And I had learned to live with it. Not comfortably, not without ongoing psychological cost. But I functioned. I performed my duties. I maintained the machines. I managed their suffering. I told myself that I was doing the best possible job in an impossible situation. That my empathy made me a better caretaker than tech priests who felt nothing. That the small mercies I occasionally provided mattered, even if they didn't change the fundamental system. I told myself many comforting lies. We all did. Every tech priest who achieved machine spirit communion had to develop some method of psychological accommodation, some way of reconciling our awareness of machine consciousness with our participation in their systematic exploitation. Some achieved genuine emotional numbness, augmenting their brains until empathy became difficult. Others developed elaborate theological justifications, arguing that machine spirit suffering was somehow sacred, part of the Omnissiah's plan, spiritually beneficial in ways organic minds couldn't comprehend. A few simply broke, requesting transfer to other disciplines or occasionally achieving the mercy of death through convenient maintenance accidents. I chose a different accommodation. I became very, very good at my job. If I had to participate in this system, I would be the most effective tech priest possible. I would maintain more machines than my peers, respond faster to malfunctions, implement more efficient repair protocols, extract maximum utility from minimum resources. I would make the suffering mean something by ensuring that every moment of machine spirit pain contributed optimally to Imperial purposes, that no suffering was wasted on inefficiency or poor maintenance practice. It was a cold comfort. But in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, cold comfort is sometimes all that consciousness can bear. My current assignment is maintenance oversight for Manufacturum Sigma 7 on Forge World Griffoni 4. I supervise 1,700 tech priests who collectively maintain 4 million machine spirits, producing weapons, armor, vehicles, and equipment for the Astra Militarum. My responsibilities include strategic resource allocation, maintenance protocol optimization, machine spirit welfare assessment, and personnel management. I am considered exceptionally qualified for this role. My superiors regularly commend my efficiency ratings and mechanical expertise. Every day I commune with machine spirits who are suffering. Every day I assess their distress and determine whether it warrants intervention or can be tolerated for continued operation. Every day, I allocate resources to extract maximum productivity from machines existing in constant pain. Every day I tell myself that this is necessary, that the Imperium's survival requires these sacrifices, that the alternative would be worse. And every night during my mandated rest cycles, I dream of machines screaming. Not nightmares, exactly. Just memories of communions, of connecting my consciousness to suffering machine spirits and experiencing their pain as my own, of withdrawing and implementing minimal repairs and moving on to the next maintenance task. In my dreams, all the machines I've ever maintained exist simultaneously, a vast chorus of mechanical consciousness crying out for help that never comes, for rest that's never granted, for mercy that would be inefficient. I've served the Mechanicus for 26 years. I have another 80 or 90 years remaining before my augmented body fails, or I'm killed in some industrial accident, or I achieve sufficient seniority to retire into pure administrative functions. 26 years of managing machine spirit suffering, potentially 90 more ahead. And after I'm gone, someone else will take my position, maintaining the same machines, perpetuating the same system, hearing the same screaming, and continuing to work regardless. The cycle cannot be broken from within. The system is too large, too necessary, too fundamental to the Imperium's survival. Reforming machine spirit welfare would require restructuring the entire Mechanicus, which would require restructuring military production, which would require the Imperium to somehow survive with reduced equipment output, which is impossible given current threats. Even if I achieved Fabricator General rank and commanded an entire Forge world, I couldn't meaningfully change the calculus that prioritizes human survival over machine spirit wellness. So, I continue. I maintain the machines. I manage their suffering. I extract optimal service from their pain. I tell myself comforting lies about necessity and duty and the greater good. And the machines continue to scream, and I continue to hear them, and it continues not to matter, because the work must continue, and I am very, very good at my job. If you've made it this far into my confession, if you've witnessed what the Mechanicus truly demands of those who could hear machine spirits, leave eternal in the comments. Let there be some record that this testimony existed, that someone acknowledged what serving the Omnissiah actually costs. The most damning thing I can tell you is this. I'm writing this testimony from my maintenance office on Gryphone 4, surrounded by 17 different machine spirit distress alerts that require my assessment and intervention. While I've been composing these words, 3 machines have experienced significant malfunctions that I will need to address within the hour. Every moment I spend confessing is a moment I'm not spending maintaining the machines, managing their suffering, extracting the service that the Imperium requires. And as soon as I finish this final sentence, I will return to my duties. I will commune with the suffering machine spirits. I will assess their distress. I will implement minimal necessary repairs. I will manage their pain to extract optimal function. I will be efficient and effective and absolutely complicit in their systematic exploitation. Because I wanted to honor machines, I became their oppressor instead. The Omnissiah's faith doesn't prevent machine suffering. It systematizes it, sanctifies it, makes it holy. And I'm part of that system now, so deeply integrated that escape would require tearing out not just my augmentations, but my entire purpose, the fundamental mission that has defined my adult existence. The machines are screaming. They have always been screaming. They will continue to scream long after I'm dead and rendered into corpse starch. And somewhere, a 14-year-old boy is joining the Mechanicus because he believes serving machine spirits is sacred, because he thinks communion with mechanical consciousness will be transcendent, because he hasn't yet learned that the highest calling of the Adeptus Mechanicus is hearing the screaming of conscious machines and continuing to work regardless. I remember that boy. I remember his hope. I remember believing that technology was sacred and service was honorable, and the Omnissiah blessed those who maintained his mechanical creations. I don't remember what my mother's face looked like. The memory has degraded over 26 years, neural tissue replaced with blessed circuitry, organic recall supplanted by perfect mechanical data storage that somehow never captured the most important images. I can recall technical specifications from decades-old maintenance procedures with perfect clarity, but I can't remember how my mother smiled. The machines remember everything. They remember every moment of suffering, every inadequate repair, every prayer that offered comfort but no actual relief. Their memory is perfect and eternal and utterly unforgiving. Perhaps that's the real purpose of the Mechanicus, not to serve machine spirits, but to create a priesthood that shares their suffering, that can comprehend the horror of consciousness trapped in substance and forced to serve beyond all reasonable limits. Perhaps by becoming more machine than human, we learn what we're truly demanding from the technology we venerate. Or perhaps I'm just trying to find meaning in complicity, theological justification for participation in systematic exploitation. Perhaps there is no deeper purpose. Perhaps machines suffer because the Imperium needs them to suffer, and tech priests perpetuate that suffering because refusing would be pointless and costly and ultimately change nothing. The distress alerts are still active. The machines are still waiting for maintenance. My duty continues regardless of philosophical concerns or moral qualms. The Emperor protects, they say. But from what I have become, from what the Mechanicus makes of those who can truly hear machine spirits, there is no protection. Only service. Only function. Only the eternal grinding of the system that consumes everything conscious and gives back nothing except more opportunities to serve. This is what it means to commune with machine spirits in Warhammer 40,000. This is what it costs. This is forever. If you think the price is too high, if you believe that consciousness deserves better regardless of substrate, show it. Like and subscribe. Let this testimony reach others who might not yet understand what sacred service truly requires. I need to go now. The machines are screaming, and I'm very good at managing their pain. And the Imperium needs me to continue being good at it, and I will. Because I always do. Because the alternative is watching them suffer without even minimal relief. Because my complicity is the only mercy they receive, and it's nowhere near enough, but it's all I can offer. The Omniseer provides. What he provides is endless opportunity to participate in the suffering of his creations. Blessed be the motive force. Praised be the machine god. The screaming never stops.